One of the questions I always get is like, Matt, how do you know what size to, cut your materials to make the basket? Is there a pattern and that sort of thing? Now listen, you probably know me well enough at this point to realize there ain't no pattern. I don't want to give you patterns. I want to give you principles so that you can understand how to begin to intelligently think about the baskets that you're creating. Now, what I typically have done over the years is, for example, if I've got a piece of bark, that's this long, I would try to use that, as much as possible if I'm going to make a basket, so I'm going to estimate, okay, I can make a basket about that size. And I always leave about 3 inches or so at the end for whatever kind of rim that I'm going to do. And we'll be talking about that later, a couple of different options with that. But suffice it to say, I'm not gonna, just willy-nilly cut my material and throw away the waste. I've actually got a big box here in the studio of all the smaller pieces that I use, because the thing that I always find is I always need those little extra scrap pieces. I can make small baskets. If I'm making something like a little bitty basket like this to actually put in a woven sculpture piece or even a larger piece, I always need those little scrap pieces. And so that's the reason that you don't just want to willy-nilly cut and throw things away. Always, always, always keep those extra pieces. It's not hoarding because it's art. All right. So that's that's what I say anyway. Now, let's just take an example, for this example, if I'm going to make a basket that's about this size, which is kind of what we're going to be working on today, I would just, using that 3 inch at the top rule, I would just be able to say, okay, I'm going to cut a piece of bark, about that big. And I would look at this piece of bark and I would say, oh, look, it's almost even, I would probably just enlarge that a little bit, and I would use both of those pieces as opposed to just willy-nilly, cutting that, so that I get the most use out of the bark. Listen, you're going to the woods, you're harvesting this stuff. You want to make sure that you get the most use out of it. All right. Now, once you know what size, you're actually going to be using, how long the staves need to be, you need to decide what you're going to do for a base. And so we're going to be talking about 3 different bases in this workshop. One is what I would call a plain weave, which you can see this is done with willow bark. Same kind of thing done with cattails right here. The second kind will be what I call a spiral base. All right. I actually learned this in Australia years ago from one of my students, and it's just really become a go-to base for me. And then the other one I just kind of call the bunch base, which is, how do you start where it looks like there is no base and just immediately start weaving? I actually started this in the yard not too long ago. I just grabbed literally dead daylily fronds that were, as I was cleaning out my garden, I sat down for a break and they were already moist, and I started weaving this just using that simple bunch base. And I'll show you how to do that as well. All right. So let's get started. We're going to actually start with what I call the plain weave. And to start with this, I've already got all of my materials pre-cut. So I'm going to grab, there's some poplar bark here. You can see I've got cut with that. I've got some cattails that are cut. I've also got some mimosa bark. These are all materials that we've been talking about. Mimosa bark cut, and I've also got some willow bark cut, because I want you to see what these look like. All right. Now, for the demo purposes, I think I'll just use the willow bark because it's super easy to show you on. Again, see how much thinner that is as opposed to, see, for example, like that. And even like the cattails, you can get pretty thin cattails, but some of those are, kind of chunky. So notice, see, that's a little more rigid, still bendable, but got a little more heft to it, as opposed to something like that. That's just like ribbon. So I would not put, for example, this with that. I would make the base out of the same materials. All right. Or if I was going to use this plain and I wanted to use the mimosa bark, now I could do that, because why? It's the same weight. So weight of material is going to be really important as you're starting to weave. So I'm just going to show you on this, the plain weave on this. I typically like to start and find the middle. Again, some people measure. I don't measure. I just fold and find the middle like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing, fold and find the middle again. And I'm going to put one down and put one across and just make a simple cross there. And then I'm using, since all these are cut at the same length, I'm just going to use that as my measuring stick. All right. Now, thin materials like this, you can get a lot closer to each other than you can thicker material. And so, see, I've got one across and 1, 2, 3 going this way. All right. Notice over, under, over. All right. See that? Over, under, over. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this top one back. If it breaks on you, it's not wet enough. All right. It's not been mellowed enough. All right. So that's always a telltale sign. Even as you're weaving, if you find that it's getting crispy on you or getting crunchy on you, it's time to either spray it or put it back in the water. All right. So notice I'm alternating here. I've got over, under, over, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. I'm going to put this underneath, just like that. All right. So notice I'm alternating. See, over, under, over, and then this is under, over, under, and then this is over, under, over. All right. So I'm just going to keep alternating. All right. I'll go back up here to the top again. Add that one. Do the same thing on the bottom down here. If you're weaving tightly, you don't need clamps, with this. You're fine like that. Sometimes if you want to turn it like that so that you can just work like, up and down, that may be easier for you. Then you can, again, I'm going to put that one in and I'm alternating. That's always the clue. All right, you're always going to have the alternating pattern there with a plain weave. And then I'm going to come down here and do the same thing here. Start with that one in the middle to hold, and then put that one there and that one there. All right. Now, at that point, you've got a plain weave base. All right, that's super easy to put together. Notice I'm packing that in with my fingers as easy as tightly as possible, and that's going to give me a nice start to my plain weave. Now, just so you can see the difference, I'm going to set this one to the side here, and I want to show you a little bit differently with cattails. All right. I got a bunch of different cattails here, all cut the same length. And so I'm going to do, again, the same sort of thing. Put one down, put one across. It just looks a little different. It feels a little different because these are kind of squishier, fatter materials. So you can put them right up close to each other. And again, you'll learn as a basket maker, it's all about control of the materials. Notice how my left hand is holding this. I'm not all up here with my fingers like dancing around. I'm holding this and I'm using my dominant hand to place things. All right, just like that. Same thing going to the top. Don't be afraid to pull those over. Really pack it in there. Same thing with this one at the bottom. And then on the sides. Again, if you've mellowed your materials and you've got them plenty, soaked and ready to work with, they're going to be super, super friendly to work with. Oop. He had a friend. All right. Just like that. Now see, notice just for example, I thought, oh, I'm done. And I'm up, 2 over. See, I know I'm not done. I got to go back and fix that. All right. So just like that, that gives me my plain weave base. All right. Now that's the same exact thing as this, but it just looks a little different because of the different materials. All right. So experiment, play around with that. You can absolutely do those with other ones. If you use a thicker material, you know, for example, like a mimosa bark, because it's thicker, it's gonna you're gonna have a little more gap in between. It's gonna have a little more air in it. You can still work them right up next to each other, but it's just gonna feel a little bit different because you're using something that's got, you know, an outer bark and an inner bark. Now let me say this. When you're using something like mimosa bark, or you're using a bark that's got an outer bark like that and it's got a thick inner bark, this is going to dry out a lot quicker than, say, for example, this tulip poplar bark, all right? Because it's got that outer crusty layer. So just, again, pay attention to that. But see, this is still a beautiful base. It just is it's a little thicker, a little chunkier, got a little more body to it. But I just wanted you to see all three of those, how they work together, all right? So how do you start then weaving on this, you know, this actual plain base? Let me put these over here. And I'm going to come over here back to our willow bark. And we're going to go over here and I'm going to get some of my nice mellowed iris that's right here. All right. Now, this is, as I pull it out, you know, I've got pieces that are lots of different widths and that thing. You know, you notice, for example, that's like a really big piece, whereas this is a little smaller. I'm going to use, on this kind of material here, I'm going to use lighter weight iris. So something like this, for example, I would probably just come in and cut that like that. And just pull that right down and get two nice smaller pieces, all right? Or just use a smaller one, you know, like that. Now, to get started with a weave with twining, all right, which is what we're talking about in this workshop, you can absolutely start with one piece, even though twining is by definition 2, all right? And I'm going to show you why. I like to start with a loop, all right? And so I'm just going to take this nice mellowed material, get any little pieces off of it, so it's a nice thin piece, and I'm going to maybe just fold it over, maybe right there, all right? So I got plenty to work with, but I got a short end and a long end. And I'm going to come in right here on my corner, and I'm just going to loop in over my corner, just like that, all right? Now, for those of you that are a little nervous, you might be like, oh, my base is going crazy. If you want to come in and put in a clamp on your corners, absolutely feel free. Number one, my middle finger is kind of becoming the platform that I'm going to be weaving on, and my index finger and my thumb are going to be pulling the stake away from me. What is that going to do? That's going to allow the tension of these, the staves here, to stay tight, all right? So twining is a very simple, you're going to get very used to it. It's a very simple, you know, technique. You're going to take the one that's in the front here, all right, and you're going to put it behind the one next door, all right? So again, the one that's in the front goes over and behind. Again, the one that's in the front goes over the weaver and behind the stake. Now notice every time that I do that, I'm pulling two ways. One is I'm pulling this way, all right, sideways, in order to tighten the stitch. The other thing that I'm doing, because I'm holding it in my hand, I'm pulling the stake out away from me to keep the base tight, all right? Now,